The cold bit through my uniform as I stepped out of the service entrance, my breath forming small clouds that disappeared into the Vienna night. Inside the Belvedere's private event hall, crystal chandeliers cast warm light over women in silk and men in tailored wool, but out here the January wind reminded me exactly where I belonged. I pulled my thin coat tighter and checked my phone. Still no message from the hospice. Grandmother's breathing had been labored that morning, each inhale a small battle she was losing. Table 7 needs champagne, Marco hissed through the door. The one with the roses. I slipped back into the warmth, grabbed the bottle from the ice bucket and wove through the crowd. Table 7 sat slightly apart from the others, a deliberate distance that money bought. 3 men in dark suits, one woman whose diamonds caught every flicker of light, and him, the one who hadn't looked at the menu once, whose stillness felt more dangerous than any movement. I poured with practiced invisibility the way good service required, but as I reached his glass, his hand moved slightly, a pause that made me hesitate. His eyes met mine for exactly 2 seconds, gray as winter steel, before he nodded. I finished pouring and retreated, my pulse inexplicably quick. My phone buzzed in my apron. I glanced at the screen, the hospice. My hands shook as I stepped into the service corridor and answered in the language grandmother had taught me, the one that connected us to a home we'd left 20 years ago when I was 5. The words came fast and desperate, my professional composure cracking as the nurse explained the pneumonia, the decline, the choices that needed making tonight. I was agreeing to intubation, to one more battle, when I felt the weight of someone's attention. I turned. He stood 3 meters away, the man from table 7, his expression unchanged but his focus absolute. I ended the call, switched back to German, apologized for the disruption. "You're fluent," he said, not as a question. His voice carried the faint melody of somewhere south, refined but unmistakable. "My grandmother taught me." "How many languages do you speak?" The question felt like a test I hadn't studied for. 4 fluently, 2 conversationally. He studied me the way art dealers studied paintings, assessing provenance, value, potential. "What's your name?" "Amli." "Amli?" He let it settle between us. "I'm Dante Carrazza. I own this venue, among other things. Tomorrow evening, meet me at the address I'm about to give you. There's an opportunity that requires your particular skills." He handed me a business card, thick stock with minimal text, an address in the first district, a time. No phone number, no explanation. "I work tomorrow," I said, though we both knew I was already considering it. "No, you don't. I've just reassigned your shifts." He turned toward the main hall, then paused. "The hospice bill from tonight, it's handled. Consider it in advance." I stood in the service corridor long after he disappeared, the card warm between my fingers, my carefully constructed life suddenly feeling like a door I'd been standing behind without realizing it was unlocked. The address led to a building where even the door handles looked expensive, the kind of place I'd only seen from the outside while serving at adjacent venues. The intercom crackled when I pressed the button marked Carrazza Enterprises, Penthouse. "Amli," a woman's voice, crisp and professional, "take the private elevator. Code is 1847. The elevator moved so smoothly I barely felt the ascent. When the doors opened, I stepped into a space that was more library than office. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Vienna, leather-bound books, a desk that probably cost more than a year of my rent. A woman in her 40s, hair pulled back severely, assessed me with the same calculating precision Dante had shown. "I'm Chiara, Mr. Carrazza's executive assistant. He'll be with you shortly. Coffee, tea." "Water, please." She returned with sparkling water in a crystal glass, then handed me a leather folder. "Standard confidentiality agreement. Read it carefully." The document was thorough without being threatening. I would assist with translation and cultural liaison services, maintain absolute discretion, make myself available for travel on short notice. The compensation made my hands tremble slightly. 3 months' salary for every week of work, with guaranteed minimums. That's generous, I managed. Mr. Caraza values competence, Chiara said. He also protects his investments. The money you received last night for your grandmother's care. It's not a loan, but walking away now would be inconvenient for both parties. The door opened before I could respond. Dante entered without ceremony, wearing a charcoal suit that probably had a tailor's name I couldn't pronounce. He moved to the windows, hands in his pockets, and watched the city below as if it owed him an explanation. "Your grandmother," he said, "how is she this morning?" The question caught me off guard. "Stable. The pneumonia is responding to antibiotics." "Good." He turned, and again I felt that focused assessment. I need someone who can navigate multiple languages and cultures without drawing attention. Someone who understands that business at my level requires discretion. The work is legal, but the people we deal with value privacy. Can you do that? What exactly would I be doing? Translating contracts, facilitating meetings, occasionally attending social events where your presence would be useful. You'd travel, Milan, Zurich, sometimes further. Everything you need will be provided. For 3 months. Initially, if we work well together, longer. I should have asked more questions, should have walked away from the beautiful chain he was offering. But grandmother's hospice bill sat on my phone like a weight I couldn't lift alone, and something in his careful stillness suggested he understood exactly what calculus I was running. "I'll need to visit my grandmother every day," I said. "A car will be at your disposal. Chiara will handle logistics." He nodded toward his assistant, then back at me. "One more thing. There's a gathering tonight at my home, family dinner. My mother will be there. She's deaf, signs in Italian sign language. I understand you're familiar." My grandmother's friend from the community center had taught me years ago, patient hands shaping meaning in silence. "Yes." "Then tonight will be your first assignment. 7 o'clock. Chiara has the address." He extended his hand. I shook it, his grip firm but brief, and felt the door swing wider. Dante's home wasn't a house. It was a statement carved into a hillside overlooking the Danube, all glass and stone and deliberate shadows. Chiara had sent a car at 6:30, along with a garment bag containing a dress I'd never have chosen for myself. Deep blue silk that moved like water, understated but clearly expensive. A woman in her 60s answered the door, her face skeptical until I signed a greeting. Her expression transformed, hands moving in rapid response, asking who I was, where I'd learned, why Dante hadn't mentioned me before. Her name, I learned, was Giuliana, and she'd been waiting 20 years for her son to bring someone home who could speak her language. Dinner was smaller than I'd expected. Just Giuliana, Dante, and an older man introduced as Luca, who carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who'd earned his position through decades rather than inheritance. The conversation flowed between spoken Italian and sign, and I found myself not just translating but bridging the subtle gaps between what people said and what they meant. Giuliana asked about my family, my grandmother, how a girl from Vienna's 20th district had learned 6 languages. I told her about grandmother's insistence that language was freedom, that every tongue we spoke was another door we could open. She smiled at that, then turned to Dante. "She understands," she signed. "Keep her close." Dante's response was too quick for me to fully catch, but Giuliana laughed and swatted his hand. "You always were terrible at taking advice." After dinner, Dante walked me to the terrace while Luca kept Giuliana engaged inside. The city spread below us, lights like fallen stars, and I felt the temperature drop as evening deepened into night. "You made my mother happy," he said. "That's rare." "She's lonely." "Yes." He didn't elaborate, but something in his profile, the way he watched the city as if it were a chessboard, suggested loneliness was a family trait. "Tomorrow we fly to Milan. Meetings that require your skills. Pack for 3 days. Dante, I made myself use his name. What exactly is your business? He turned, and in the low light his eyes were darker, harder to read. I facilitate connections. I move resources where they're needed. I solve problems that bureaucracy creates. Some people call it logistics. Others have less kind terms. He paused, letting me absorb that. If you want to leave, now is the time. After tomorrow, things become more complicated. I should have asked what complicated meant. Should have recognized the warning for what it was. Instead, I thought of grandmother's peaceful smile that morning, the specialist who'd somehow appeared to consult on her case, the weight of debt transformed into choice. 7 a.m., I asked. 6:30, the plane won't wait. He smiled slightly, the first real warmth I'd seen. Thank you, Amelie, for tonight. I nodded and walked back through his beautiful, lonely house, understanding that I just accepted an invitation I didn't fully understand but couldn't bring myself to refuse. The private jet was smaller than I'd imagined, but appointed with the kind of quiet luxury that didn't need to announce itself. Leather seats, mahogany trim, a galley stocked with food I'd only served, never tasted. Dante worked through papers while we taxied, barely glancing up as we lifted into the pre-dawn sky. There's a folder on your seat, he said once we'd leveled off. Background on today's meetings. You'll need to be familiar with the principals and their concerns. The folder contained dossiers that read like corporate intelligence, companies, family connections, financial positions, personal preferences. Marco Santini, real estate developer with political connections. Elena Bartali, art dealer with a sideline in cultural acquisitions. Giuseppe Renzo, whose official title was consultant but whose actual function seemed deliberately vague. These people, I said carefully, they're legitimate. They operate in gray areas. So do I. Dante set down his papers and gave me his full attention. I'm not a good man, Amelie. I've done things that would horrify you if you knew the details, but I follow rules, my own rules, carefully chosen. I don't harm civilians, I don't traffic in suffering, I protect what's mine, and I honor my debts. He paused. Your grandmother's hospice care, that's not a debt you owe me. That's a debt my family owed your family, though you didn't know it. What do you mean? Later. For now, understand that you're safe with me, but the world I move through isn't safe. If at any point you want out, tell me. I'll arrange everything you need. Housing, education funding, continued care for your grandmother. No strings. Why would you do that? Because Giuliana likes you, and because you have the spine to ask difficult questions instead of just accepting pretty cages. He returned to his papers. We land in 40 minutes. Read the files. The meetings took place in a private room at Milan's Palazzo Parigi, each party arriving separately, everything choreographed to avoid obvious connections. I translated contracts, clarified terms, caught the small slips where someone's English didn't match their intention. During a break, Elena Bartali pulled me aside and switched to rapid French, asking who I really was, whether Dante was finally settling down, if I knew what I'd gotten into. I'm his translator, I said in the same language. No, Cara, you're his tell. He never brings anyone to these meetings. That you're here means something. She studied me with the practiced eye of someone who appraised value for a living. Be careful. Dante protects what's his, but possession and partnership are different things. The words followed me through the rest of the day, through the dinner at a restaurant where we occupied a private room and everyone spoke in euphemisms I was starting to decode. Restructuring meant money laundering. Consulting meant something darker. Facilitation meant making problems disappear. That night back at the hotel, Dante had chosen understated elegance, the kind of place that didn't need a sign. I found a box on my bed. Inside was a string of pearls, simple but perfect, with a note in Dante's angular handwriting. For tonight's work. Tomorrow we fly to Zurich. Bring the pearls. I held them up to the light, seeing both the beauty and the weight. Elena's warning echoed, but so did Giuliana's smile, and the specialist's confident hands checking grandmother's lungs, and the small freedom of a bank account that wasn't constantly screaming emergency. I put the pearls on and looked at myself in the mirror, a woman I almost didn't recognize, standing in a room I couldn't afford, wearing gifts that came with invisible terms. The cold Vienna nights felt very far away, but I couldn't decide if that was freedom or just a different kind of cage built from warmer materials. The next morning, I found Dante in the hotel's breakfast room, reading a newspaper with the focus he brought to everything. When I sat down, he looked up and noticed the pearls. "They suit you," he said simply. "Thank you, though I'm not sure I earned them. You kept three difficult personalities from walking away from a very profitable arrangement. You noticed when Giuseppe's translator deliberately mistranslated a liability clause, and you managed to make Alina laugh, which I've never seen anyone do in a business context." He folded the newspaper. "You earned them." The flight to Zurich was briefer, the meeting simpler, a banker who specialized in what he called international asset optimization, and what I was beginning to understand as legal camouflage for money that preferred to move in shadows. Dante conducted the entire conversation in German, occasionally glancing at me to confirm nuance, and I realized he spoke it perfectly well. He didn't need a translator. He needed a witness, someone whose presence changed the room's chemistry. After, we had lunch at a cafe overlooking the lake, and for the first time since I'd met him, Dante seemed almost relaxed. He ordered in Swiss German with the local accent, asked about my grandmother without making it sound like surveillance, told me about growing up between Italy and Austria, between his father's world and his mother's silence. "She stopped speaking after the accident that took her hearing," he explained. "Trauma, the doctors said, but I think she just decided words weren't worth the effort anymore. Signs were cleaner, more honest." Is that why you value directness? Is that what you think I value? You don't waste time on pleasantries. You say what you mean. In business, yes. In other areas, he paused, considering. I've learned that power is most effective when it doesn't announce itself, when people choose to cooperate because it serves them, not because they're forced. Is that what you're doing with me? Making cooperation feel like choice? He smiled at that, something genuine beneath the calculated surface. "You tell me, do you feel coerced?" I wanted to say yes, to claim the moral high ground of a victim. But sitting there in the Swiss sunlight, wearing pearls I'd earned, discussing philosophy with a man who'd paid for my grandmother's survival, the truth was more complicated. "I feel like I'm standing at a crossroads," I admitted. "And you've lit one path very brightly while leaving the others in shadow. That's not force, but it's not neutral either." "Fair," he leaned back, studying me with that focused intensity. "What would you do if all paths were equally lit?" "I don't know, that's what scares me." "Good, fear means you're paying attention." He signaled for the check. "Tonight we return to Vienna. Tomorrow you're free, visit your grandmother, think about whether you want to continue. If you decide no, everything I promised holds. If you decide yes, things get more interesting." "More interesting how?" "You'll see." That evening, as the plane descended toward Vienna, I watched the city lights organize themselves into familiar patterns and realized I was already thinking of Dante's world as the new normal. The jets, the careful conversations, the luxury that came with invisible price tags. The crossroads was behind me. I'd already chosen, I just hadn't admitted it yet. The car dropped me at grandmother's hospice near midnight. I'd called ahead, and the night nurse let me in with a sympathetic smile. Grandmother was awake, propped up on pillows, her breathing easier than it had been in weeks. "You look different," she said in our language, the one that connected us across decades and distance. "Expensive." I sat beside her bed and took her hand. "I found work, good work. With that boy, the one who sent the Swiss specialist." "His name is Dante. How did you know?" "I know things, little bird. I know his father too." "Knew." She corrected herself with a small cough. Long time ago, different world. Your grandfather did business with Carlo Carrazza, not always legal business. The room felt suddenly smaller. What kind of business? The kind that kept us alive when we first came here. The kind that built the life I wanted for you, safe, clean, educated. She squeezed my hand. Don't judge me or him. We did what survival required. But Amelie, if you're walking into that world, remember, they never let you leave cleanly. Every gift is a thread. Eventually you're wrapped in a net you mistake for a safety blanket. Dante says I can leave any time. And maybe he means it. But will you want to? That's the real trap when the cage becomes preferable to freedom. She coughed again, longer this time. Just promise me you'll keep your eyes open. Promise you'll remember who you are. I promised, though I wasn't sure I knew who that was anymore. The girl who'd served champagne in a thin coat felt like someone I'd left behind in another country, another life. The woman wearing pearls and flying in private jets was still a stranger, but she was the one whose grandmother had a Swiss specialist checking her charts every morning. When I left an hour later, the night air felt different, not colder but clearer. Grandmother's warning lodged somewhere behind my sternum, a small weight I'd carry forward. But so did the image of her peaceful breathing, the oxygen monitor showing numbers that meant more days, more conversations, more time. Dante had given me that. The question was what he'd ask for in return. I spent the next morning in my tiny apartment, the one I kept meaning to give up but hadn't yet, sorting through clothes that no longer fit the person I was becoming. My phone buzzed, Chiara, asking if I'd made a decision. I stared at the message for a long time before typing my response. I'm in, what's next? The answer came within minutes. Dinner tonight, Dante's home, 8 p.m. formal. The dress Chiara sent was the color of midnight, deceptively simple until I put it on and saw how it transformed my silhouette. Elegant, expensive, designed to help me blend into a world where net worth determined visibility. I paired it with the pearls and looked at myself in the mirror, seeing both grandmother's warning and my own reflection staring back. The car arrived at 7:30. The same driver, the same smooth ride up the hillside, but this time when I entered Dante's home, it felt different. Less like visiting and more like arriving somewhere I was expected. Dinner was just the two of us, served on the terrace despite the January cold, heat lamps creating a pocket of warmth in the winter night. Dante had changed from his usual suits into something slightly less formal, charcoal sweater, no tie, and the casualness felt more intimate than any amount of silk and jewels. You chose to stay, he said, pouring wine. Why? Honestly, because walking away would have been cowardice disguised as morality. You offered me a choice, and I made it. Even knowing what I am. I don't know what you are, I know what you do, or some of it. I know what your world looks like from the outside, but you specifically, I met his eyes, still figuring that out. He smiled at that, something genuine breaking through the careful control. Fair enough, then let me show you something. He led me inside to his study, a room I hadn't seen before, lined with books in multiple languages, dominated by a desk that looked like it had survived generations. He unlocked a drawer and pulled out a folder, older and more worn than the corporate dossiers. My father, he said, laying out photographs. Carlo Carrazza. He built what I have now, but he built it differently, more violence, less sophistication. When he died, I inherited an empire and a war. I've spent 15 years trying to transform one and end the other. The photos showed a man who looked like Dante might in 20 years. Same gray eyes, same careful posture. But where Dante's expression suggested control, Carlo's suggested threat. Why are you showing me this? Because your grandmother was right. My father did business with your grandfather. He helped get your family out of Georgia when things collapsed after the Soviet Union fell. And in the process, he made promises he didn't live to keep: financial support, protection, citizenship assistance. When I found out you existed, that you were working tables in venues I own. It felt like the universe offering me a chance to clear an old debt. I stared at the photos, at the architectural drawings beneath them showing legitimate businesses, at the careful documentation of transformation. So I'm a debt repayment. You started as one. But Emily, I don't typically take my debts to Milan or introduce them to my mother. I don't buy them gifts or have private dinners. Somewhere in the last 10 days, you stopped being an obligation and became something else. What? He set down the folder and turned to face me fully. A complication, a risk, someone I think about when I should be thinking about business. He paused. Someone I want to keep safe, which in my world is the most dangerous thing I can want. The words hung between us, honest and weighted. I felt the pull of them, the seduction of being wanted by someone who admitted risk, who framed desire as danger. But grandmother's warning echoed, and I made myself step back. I need you to understand something, I said carefully. I'm grateful for what you've done. I'm interested in learning this world. But I'm not an acquisition. I'm not something you collect because you can. I know. Do you? Because from here, it looks like you're very good at arranging circumstances until people choose what you want them to choose. He absorbed that without flinching. You're right, I am. It's how I've survived. But with you, I'm trying something different. I'm telling you my intent before executing the strategy. I'm asking permission instead of engineering inevitability. He moved closer, not touching, but close enough that I could smell his cologne, cedar, and something darker. I want you, Emily, not as an employee or a debt or a translator. I want you in ways that complicate everything I've built. And I'm telling you this so you can decide with full information. My heart was racing, my careful rationality dissolving under the heat of his proximity. What if I say no? Then we continue as we are. You work, I pay you, we maintain professional boundaries. I'll hate every minute of it, but I'll respect your choice. And if I say yes? Then we figure it out together, slowly, with boundaries you set, with exit routes you control. He reached up slowly, giving me time to retreat, and touched my cheek with one finger. I may be terrible at many things, but I keep my promises. You'd be safe with me, even from me. I should have said no, should have maintained the professional distance that kept things clear. But standing there in his study, surrounded by evidence of his father's violence and his own attempts at transformation, I made a choice that probably started the moment he'd paid grandmother's bills without being asked. I leaned in and kissed him. It was brief, testing, a question more than an answer. He responded with a control that somehow made it more intense, his hand moving to the nape of my neck, his thumb tracing small circles that made me shiver. When we broke apart, his breathing was slightly uneven, his careful composure cracked. That's a yes then, he said, voice rough. That's a maybe, a let's see, a proceed with caution. I'll take it, he smiled, and for the first time since I'd met him, he looked young, unguarded, and genuinely happy. Stay tonight. Just sleep, separate rooms, nothing you're not ready for, but stay. I did, and that night in his guest room, wrapped in sheets that probably cost more than my monthly rent, I thought about crossroads and choices, and the thin line between safety and captivity. Somewhere in another room, Dante was probably lying awake too, calculating risks and returns on an investment that had transformed into something neither of us could quite define. Morning arrived with breakfast on the terrace and Chiara appearing with the day's schedule. But before business could resume, Dante handed me a phone, newer, more secure than mine. For you, he said, my number's programmed. So is Giuliana's, Chiara's, and Luca's. If you need anything or feel unsafe, you call. Unsafe from what? From my world, from me if I ever cross a line, from yourself if this gets too heavy. He paused. I'm trusting you with access, Emily. That means something in my life. I took the phone, understanding it was both gift and leash, freedom and connection. What's today's schedule? Hospice visit first, then I need you at a meeting this afternoon. Some associates from Turin. After, we have a gallery opening, art collection debut, very social, very public. Public. People will see us together. Conclusions will be drawn. If you're not ready for that visibility, tell me now. I thought about it, about what being seen with Dante Carrazza would mean, about the boxes people would put me in, mistress, gold digger, arm candy. But I also thought about grandmother's smile when I told her the care would continue, about Giuliana's delighted hands moving in sign, about the sensation of standing in rooms where decisions worth millions were made and having my voice matter. I'm ready, I said. Grandmother was sitting up when I arrived, color better than I'd seen in months. The specialist had been by earlier, she told me, and had adjusted her medications. She'd be strong enough for short walks soon, maybe even a trip outside when weather permitted. Your boy has good doctors, she said. He's not my boy. She gave me a look that suggested she wasn't fooled. Be careful, little bird. Men like that, they don't know how to love small, they consume. Maybe I want to be consumed. Then make sure you take equal bites. I laughed at that, and we spent the next hour talking about her childhood in Tbilisi, about my grandfather who died before I was old enough to remember him, about the choices people made when survival and morality competed for attention. She didn't judge Dante or his world, but she made me promise again to keep my eyes open, to remember that every gift came with invisible strings. When I left, she signed one more thing. Ask him about Luca, about who really runs things. I filed that away as the car took me to the afternoon meeting. More men in expensive suits, more conversations in the gray spaces between legal and otherwise. I translated, caught subtext, watched Dante orchestrate agreements with the precision of a conductor directing a symphony. Afterward, as we left, one of the Turin associates pulled him aside, and I caught enough of their rapid Italian to understand something had shifted, some rival making moves that concerned them. Dante's expression didn't change, but his hand found the small of my back as we walked to the car, protective, possessive, a gesture that looked gentle but felt like a claim. What's wrong? I asked once we were alone. Nothing you need to worry about. Dante. He glanced at me, something like surprise crossing his features. You're using that tone already, the one that demands honesty. You said you wanted partnership, not possession. That means trusting me with information. He was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. There's a man named Rixai. He's been trying to expand into markets I control. Until now, he's been careful, respectful of boundaries. But he's starting to push, and pushing in my world eventually leads to consequences. Violent consequences. Not if I can help it. I prefer leverage to force. But I need you to understand, if Rixai decides to make this personal, you become a target by proximity. That's why the phone. That's why Luca will start coordinating your security. I don't need security. Amelie, he turned to face me fully. You're a weapon now, not in a violent sense but in the sense that hurting you would hurt me, and Rixai knows that. Please, let me protect what's mine. The phrasing grated, but the genuine concern beneath it was undeniable. I thought about grandmother's warning, about consumption and equal bites, and made a decision. Fine, but in return, you tell me the truth. About your business, about the risks, about what I'm really translating at these meetings. That's a dangerous amount of knowledge. Then I'm already in danger. Information is armor, not vulnerability. He smiled at that, something like pride in his expression. You're going to be a problem, aren't you? Count on it. The gallery opening that evening was exactly what I'd expected. Vienna's elite pretending to understand contemporary art while really showing off their wealth and connections. Dante moved through the crowd with practiced ease, introducing me as his associate, letting people draw their own conclusions. I noticed the looks, the calculations, the reassessments of who I was and what I meant. Alina was there, the art dealer from Milan. She air-kissed both my cheeks and switched to French. So it's serious then. Dante Carrazza doesn't bring associates to these things. We're figuring it out. Be smart, Kara. He's dangerous when he cares, and he's starting to care. She glanced over at Dante, who was speaking with a gallery owner. Just remember, in his world, there's no such thing as a small commitment. Everything is permanent or nothing at all. Before I could respond, I noticed something odd. A man across the room watching us with too much focus. Not admiring, not socializing, surveilling. I touched Dante's arm and tilted my head slightly in that direction. His expression didn't change, but his posture shifted. He signaled something to Luca, who materialized from wherever he'd been stationed. Within minutes, we were being guided toward a side exit, Dante's hand at my back again, that protective possessive gesture. What's happening? Rick-sized people, taking photos, gathering information. Nothing aggressive yet, but I don't want you visible longer than necessary. We left through a service entrance. The irony wasn't lost on me, and got into a different car than usual. Luca drove, taking routes that doubled back and changed direction seemingly at random. Dante made several phone calls in Italian too rapid for me to follow completely, but I caught enough. Security adjustments, schedule changes, contingency plans. I'm sorry, he said after the last call. This isn't the evening I planned. What did you plan? Wine, art, showing you off because I'm apparently becoming embarrassingly possessive. Dancing, maybe. Definitely a kiss that lasted longer than the one last night. He reached over and took my hand. Instead, we're fleeing through back alleys like characters in a film. This is your life. Yes, still sure you want to be part of it. I squeezed his hand. Ask me again when someone's actually shooting at us. He laughed at that, surprised and genuine. Amelie, you're either very brave or completely reckless. Can it be both? We returned to his home instead of my apartment, and this time there was no pretense of separate rooms. We ended up in his study, him reviewing security reports while I examined the books on his shelves. Russian literature, Italian poetry, architectural theory, a surprising amount of philosophy. I pulled out Machiavelli's The Prince, the pages worn from use. Bit on the nose, isn't it? I said. My father's copy. He made me read it at 15. I thought he was teaching me about power. Later, I realized he was teaching me about fear. Dante set down his papers and came to stand beside me. The whole book is about ruling through control and intimidation, but I prefer a different passage. He flipped to a marked page. It is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both, but everyone focuses on that. They miss the next line. Nevertheless, the prince must make himself feared in such a way that if he is not loved, at least he escapes being hated. Is that your philosophy? I'm trying. My father ruled through fear. I'd rather rule through respect, through being useful enough that people choose cooperation. But that requires more subtlety, more patience. More acts of service, I said, understanding clicking into place. The way you paid grandmother's bills, the way you arranged the specialist, you're not forcing loyalty, you're buying it with care. Is that so different? I don't know yet. I set down the book and turned to face him. Grandmother told me something today. She said to ask you about Luca, about who really runs things. Dante's expression shifted, not anger, but something like respect. Your grandmother is perceptive. Luca was my father's right hand. When I took over, he could have fought me, could have led a faction of the old guard against everything I wanted to change. Instead, he chose to advise me, to help me transform the organization into something that could survive in the modern world. So he's the real power. He's the institutional memory, I'm the vision. Neither of us could do this alone. He paused. Does that bother you, that I'm not some solitary kingpin? No, it makes you real, complicated. I reached up and touched his face, feeling the slight stubble, the warmth of his skin. Human. He turned into my touch, kissing my palm, his eyes never leaving mine. I want to be human with you, not the role I play for everyone else, just This, whatever this is. We kissed again, slower this time, exploratory rather than testing. His hands stayed respectful, one cradling my face, one at my waist, but I felt the restraint in him, the careful control. When we finally broke apart, both of us breathing heavier, he rested his forehead against mine. "Stay," he said again. "Really stay, not as an employee or a debt, as someone I want to wake up next to." Dante. No strings, no expectations beyond what we both choose. But Emily, I haven't felt this way in years, maybe ever, and I think you feel it too, even if it terrifies you. He was right. I was terrified of the intensity, of the speed, of the way my carefully constructed boundaries seemed to evaporate in his presence. But I was also exhilarated, drawn to this man who admitted his darkness while reaching for something better. "One rule," I said, "complete honesty. If this changes, if you want out, if I become another obligation, you tell me immediately." "Same goes for you." "Deal." We sealed it with another kiss, and this time when he led me to his room, I went willingly. We kept our promise, nothing explicit, just tangled limbs and quiet conversation until dawn, learning the geography of each other's pasts. He told me about his mother's accident, about taking over at 25 and making mistakes that still haunted him. I told him about leaving Georgia as a child, about grandmother raising me alone, about learning languages because it was the one currency I could control. Somewhere around 4 a.m., wrapped in his sheets with his arm around me, I realized I'd stopped calculating exits. I was just here, present, choosing this moment without constant analysis of consequences. It was terrifying and freeing in equal measure. Morning arrived too soon. Chiara appeared with coffee and news. A meeting in Vienna, then we needed to fly to Geneva for something Dante wouldn't specify until we were en route. I showered in his bathroom, used products that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget, and borrowed one of his shirts because my dress from last night felt too formal for daylight. He smiled when he saw me. "Keep it, looks better on you." The meeting was tense. More Turin associates, concerns about Rixai escalating, discussions of strategy that danced around explicit plans. I translated a contracts, caught the subtle shifts when someone changed terms slightly, watched Dante navigate competing egos with the skill of a diplomat. Afterward, Luca pulled him aside, and their conversation was too quiet for me to hear, but Dante's expression darkened. On the plane to Geneva, he finally explained. Rixai's made an official complaint to financial regulators, claims I'm engaged in money laundering, that the businesses are fronts. It's all nonsense, but it creates paperwork, investigations, visibility I don't need. Is it true? Some of it was, years ago. Now, he shrugged. Everything I do is technically legal, but the complexity exists because I needed to transition from my father's methods to mine without losing what he built. That complexity looks suspicious to regulators who want simple narratives. What happens if they investigate? They find exactly what I want them to find: legitimate businesses, proper documentation, taxes paid. But the process is disruptive, and Rixai knows that. He's trying to force mistakes, create pressure that leads to visible responses. What kind of responses? Dante met my eyes. The kind I'm trying to avoid. Violence is easy, Emily. It's transformation that's hard. Geneva's meeting was with a lawyer, not the usual corporate type, but someone who specialized in international regulations and political connections. They spoke in French, occasionally switching to Italian when technicalities required precision. I translated less, observed more, and began to understand the intricate dance of legitimate business layered over decades of less legitimate history. That evening, instead of returning immediately to Vienna, Dante took me to dinner at a restaurant overlooking the lake. It was quiet, intimate, the kind of place where deals weren't made and masks could slip slightly. "Tell me something true," I said over wine, "something you don't tell anyone else." He considered that, absently turning his glass. I'm tired of the chess games, of the calculations, of always being 3 moves ahead. I've spent 15 years trying to transform my father's empire into something I won't be ashamed of. And some days I wonder if it's possible or if I'm just polishing rust. You've done good things. The legitimate businesses employ hundreds. You support cultural institutions, fund scholarships. All excellent PR for a man trying to appear respectable. He smiled without humor. You want the truth. Half the time I don't know if I'm building something better or just becoming a more sophisticated version of what my father was. What does Luca say? That I'm too idealistic. That business is business and morality is a luxury I can't afford. He reached across and took my hand. But then you happen. You, with your languages and your spine and your refusal to pretend violence is normal. And I start thinking maybe idealism isn't naivety. Maybe it's just sanity. Don't make me your conscience, Dante. That's too much weight. I'm not. You're just proof that there's a world outside the one I've built, that normal exists and maybe I could have a piece of it. We sat in silence for a while, hands linked across the table, watching the sun set over the Alps. For a moment, I could almost forget the complications, the rivals circling, the regulatory investigations, the wealth built on generations of moral compromise. For a moment, it was just two people trying to figure out if connection was possible when one of them came from shadows. But moments end. My phone, the secure one Dante had given me, buzzed with a message from Luca. Situation developing. Return to Vienna immediately. Dante's phone rang a second later. He answered, listened, and his expression shifted into the controlled mask I'd learned meant something serious. He ended the call and signaled for the check. What happened? Rixai made a move, nothing violent but aggressive. Financial police showed up at our Milan office, seized records. It's coordinated, meant to send a message. What message? That he can reach me anywhere, that my legitimacy is an illusion he can shatter whenever he wants. Dante stood, pulling out my chair with automatic courtesy even in crisis. We need to go, now. The flight back was tense, Dante on constant calls, reorganizing responses, activating contingencies. Luca met us at the airport with a security detail I hadn't seen before, serious men in dark suits who moved with military precision. Your apartment's been compromised, Luca said to me without preamble. Nothing dangerous, but someone was inside, professional search looking for leverage. My blood went cold. My things. Already moved to a secure location. You'll stay at Dante's until we resolve this. He turned to Dante, the grandmother. Already relocated. Swiss specialist is with her, private facility, 24-hour security. Wait, I said, voice sharper than intended. You moved my grandmother without asking me. Dante faced me fully and I saw the conflict in his expression. The man who wanted partnership warring with the protector who acted first, sought permission later. Rixai's people were watching the hospice. Luca's team intercepted surveillance photos of her, of you visiting. If they wanted leverage, she was the obvious target. So you decided for me. I protected what matters to you because I didn't have time to debate. His voice was level but firm. Hate me for it if you need to, but she's safe. That's not negotiable. Part of me wanted to rage at the high-handedness, the assumption of authority over my life. But the larger part, the part that had seen how this world operated, understood that hesitation could mean harm, that in crisis, committees got people killed. Where is she? 20 minutes from here. You can see her now if you want. I want. The facility was more boutique hotel than hospital, private rooms, attentive staff, the kind of care that cost more per day than I'd made in a month as a waitress. Grandmother was asleep when we arrived, her breathing peaceful, monitors showing strong numbers. The Swiss specialist, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes, assured me the transfer had been smooth, that grandmother had actually seemed relieved by the increased security. She said something interesting, the doctor added. She said, "Good, now the boy takes it seriously." I had to smile at that. Even in crisis, grandmother was 3 steps ahead. Dante waited outside, giving me space with her. When I emerged, he was staring out the window at Vienna's lights, hands in his pockets, shoulders tight with tension. "I'm sorry," he said without turning, "for making the decision without you, for pulling you deeper into this than you signed up for. Are you offering to let me go?" "Yes, right now, tonight. I'll set you up anywhere you want. New city, new identity, funds enough to start over. Grandmother too. Complete break from all of this." I walked to stand beside him at the window. "What if I don't want to go?" "Then you're either braver or more foolish than I thought. Because, Amelie, this is only going to get worse before it resolves. Rixai's escalating because he smells weakness. My attempts at legitimacy look like vulnerability in his world. And you," he finally turned to me, "you're my weakness. That's not romance, that's tactical assessment. The smart play is to get you somewhere safe and keep you there until this ends." "The smart play," I repeated. "What about what I want?" "What do you want?" I thought about that. About cold nights serving champagne, about grandmother's labored breathing, about the woman I'd been versus the one I was becoming, about Dante's careful hands and his careful words, about the way he tried to build something better while armed with tools designed for violence. "I want to know what comes next," I said finally. "I want to see how this story ends, and I want you to stop making decisions for me, even when you think you're protecting me. Even if it puts you at risk. Especially then, because Dante, if I'm your weakness, you need me to be strong, not sheltered. You need me to be partner, not possession." I took his hand. "So here's what we do. You tell me everything. Every detail about Rixai, about the investigation, about your plans. And then we decide together. Equal weight, equal risk, equal choice." He stared at me for a long moment, and I watched the calculation happen, the impulse to protect warring with the recognition that I was right. Finally, he nodded. "Okay, but not here. Somewhere secure where we can spread out documents, maps, financial records. Somewhere we can plan properly." "Where?" "I have a place. In the Alps. Off-grid, defensible, fully supplied. We go there, we take a breath, we figure this out strategically instead of reactively." "Running away." "Strategic repositioning," he smiled slightly. "But yes, also running away, at least until Luca sets up better containment." We left within the hour, a convoy of vehicles moving through the night toward the mountains. The safe house, because that's what it was, no matter what euphemism Dante preferred, was a modernist structure built into a mountainside, all reinforced glass and clean lines. Beautiful enough to be a retreat, secure enough to be a fortress. Luca stayed outside with his team while Dante and I went in. The main room was dominated by floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a valley, with a fireplace already lit, casting warm light over leather furniture and warm wood. It should have felt cozy. Instead, it felt like a very comfortable trap. "How long do we stay here?" I asked. "As long as it takes." Dante moved to a wall panel, pressed something, and a section slid aside, revealing a computer setup and file cabinets. "Everything I need to run operations remotely. Everything you need to understand what you've gotten into." He spent the next 3 hours walking me through it all. The businesses, legitimate and otherwise, the money flows, the connections between politicians and financiers, and people who had no official titles but wielded enormous influence. He showed me where his father's empire had been, where he'd moved it, what remained to be transformed. "This," he said, pointing to a chart of financial holdings, "is what Rixai wants. Control of the northern territories, access to ports I've locked down, entry into markets I've secured. He's not wrong to want them, they're profitable. But giving them up means returning to my father's way of doing business. Violence, intimidation, exploitation." "So you fight." I'd prefer to negotiate, offer him alternative markets, introduce him to opportunities that don't require conflict. He rubbed his face, exhausted. But Rixai's old school. He sees negotiation as weakness, which means eventually this resolves one way or another. He backs down or he doesn't. And if he doesn't? Dante was quiet for a long time. Then I do what I've spent 15 years trying not to do. I respond with overwhelming force. Not violence for its own sake, but sufficient consequence that no one else considers challenging me. What does that look like? Financial ruin, exposure of his actual crimes to authorities who will act, strategic dismantling of his organization until he has nothing left to fight with. He met my eyes. It's bloodless, but it's not gentle. People lose everything: livelihoods, futures, freedom. I've done it twice before, and both times I hated myself for it. But you did it anyway. Because the alternative was worse. Because letting someone openly challenge me invites every other rival to try. Because in my world, mercy is often mistaken for weakness, and weakness gets people killed. He came to sit beside me on the couch. You see now why I wanted you away from this. Why I don't want you making choices based on incomplete information. I see why you think protecting me is your responsibility. But Dante, I'm already here. I'm already implicated. Hiding doesn't change that. No, but it buys time. Time for Luca to set up proper security. Time for me to finish the negotiation with Rixai. Time for you to decide if this life is something you can actually live with. I leaned against him, feeling his warmth, his solidity. Tell me something. If this all works out, if Rixai backs down, if the investigation goes nowhere, if everything stabilizes, what then? What does normal look like for you? Honestly, I don't know. I've been in crisis mode so long I've forgotten what peace feels like. He wrapped an arm around me. But I imagine it looks something like this. Someone to come home to, conversations that aren't strategy sessions, nights where the only thing I'm worried about is whether we're out of good wine. That sounds nice. It does, doesn't it? He kissed the top of my head. You should sleep. We're safe here for now. But I wasn't ready to sleep yet. Dante, earlier you said grandmother knowing your father wasn't coincidence, that there was a debt. What did you mean? He was quiet so long I thought he wouldn't answer. Then, your grandfather worked for my father during the early 90s when everything in the former Soviet states was chaos. He helped facilitate certain transitions of assets. In exchange, my father promised to get your family out, to provide papers, funding, security. He kept the first two promises but died before the third was fully executed. When I took over, I found records of the arrangement. Your grandmother had been receiving monthly payments until 5 years ago, when my father's old accountant retired, and the transfers got lost in reorganization. So you've been paying her. Finishing what my father started, making it right. He turned to face me. That's why when I saw you, when I realized who you were, it felt like the universe giving me a chance to close an old account. But Amelie, the minute I actually met you, it stopped being about debt and became about this. This, I repeated. What is this exactly? I don't know, something unexpected, something I'm not sure I know how to do right. He cupped my face, thumb tracing my cheekbone. But I want to try, if you'll let me. I kissed him then, answering without words. And when we finally made our way to the bedroom, his bedroom, in this fortress in the mountains, I chose to stay not because I was trapped, not because of obligation or debt, but because I wanted to. Because this complicated, dangerous man was trying to be better, and I wanted to see if I could help him get there. We made love that night, slowly, carefully, learning each other in the firelight. No possession, no performance, just genuine connection between two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely circumstances. After, tangled in sheets with his heartbeat steady under my ear, I finally let myself believe this might actually be real. But reality, I was learning, had a way of intruding on even the most perfect moments. Morning brought Luca, his face grim. Dante took the briefing in the main room while I made coffee, trying to give them space, but Luca switched to English, deliberately including me. Rixai escalated. He's filed a formal complaint with Interpol alleging human trafficking, claims you're holding women against their will, forcing them into service. I set down the coffee pot. That's insane. It's strategic, Luca corrected. Human trafficking investigations are serious, visible, and hard to contain. Even if false, they create public pressure, media attention. Everything Dante's built on discretion and legitimacy gets shredded. But there's no evidence because it's not true, I said. Evidence can be manufactured. Rixai has resources, connections. Luca looked at Dante. He's targeting the women in your employment, staff, translators, anyone who could be framed as a victim, including her. He nodded at me. Dante's expression went cold, the careful control replaced by something harder. Timeline. 48 hours before they have enough for a formal investigation, maybe less. Options. 3. 1. We disappear completely. Take operations underground, abandon legitimacy, return to your father's methods. 2. We negotiate, give Rixai what he wants in exchange for dropping this. 3. We take him out, not violence but complete dismantling. Expose his operations, trigger investigations, burn him down before he burns us. Civilian casualties on option 3. Minimal if we're surgical. His people will lose jobs, some will face charges, but no one dies. Dante looked at me. What do you think? I was startled by the question. Why are you asking me? Because you're the one Rixai's weaponizing. Because you deserve a voice in how we respond. Because I meant what I said about partnership. I thought about grandmother, about the life I'd been trying to build, about the woman I'd been versus the one I was becoming, about justice and vengeance and the difference between them. Option 1 makes you your father. Option 2 just delays the problem. So option 3, but with a condition. Whatever you do to Rixai, you document it. You show me every step. Because if I'm going to be complicit in destroying someone, I need to know exactly what I'm complicit in. Luca and Dante exchanged glances, then Dante nodded. Agreed. Luca, initiate option 3. Full documentation, nothing hidden from her. Boss. She's right. If we're doing this, we do it with open eyes, all of us. Over the next 36 hours, I watched Dante dismantle a man's empire with the precision of a surgeon. It wasn't violence. It was something colder and more efficient. Exposure of financial crimes to regulators who'd been looking for evidence. Anonymous tips to law enforcement about trafficking operations that actually existed in Rixai's organization. Strategic leaks to journalists who'd been investigating organized crime. Legal challenges to properties, frozen accounts, partnerships dissolved. Every step was documented in a folder Dante kept updating, showing me evidence, explaining strategy. I watched and learned, understanding that this was what power looked like when wielded by someone who'd studied leverage instead of relying on threats. Rixai's response was predictable: threats, attempted counters, increasingly desperate moves. But Dante had been planning this for longer, had built better defenses, had allies Rixai didn't know existed. Within 2 days, Rixai's complaints to Interpol were withdrawn, his organization crumbling, his influence evaporating. It's done, Luca said on the 3rd morning. He's finished. Bankrupt, under investigation, his people are scattering. Civilian impact, Dante asked. His legitimate employees will find work. The criminal operations are being absorbed by organizations that won't traffic or exploit. Clean as possible given the circumstances. Dante nodded, then looked at me. You've been quiet. I'm processing. I've been watching from the sidelines as someone's entire life was systematically destroyed. Yes, Rixai had been a threat. Yes, he'd engaged in genuinely horrible things, but the efficiency of it, the surgical precision, was somehow more disturbing than violence would have been. This is what you do. This is your power. Yes. And you chose not to use it like this for 15 years. Because once you start, it becomes easier each time, justified, necessary. I watched my father become someone who saw people as pieces on a board, and I swore I'd be different. He came to sit beside me. But Emily, sometimes the board requires moves. Sometimes protecting what matters means sacrificing principles for practicality. Do you feel bad about it? I feel necessary, which is worse in its way. I understood what he meant. That was the real trap, not that power corrupted absolutely, but that it made corruption feel righteous, feel required, feel like the only sensible choice. What happens now? I asked. Now we wait for things to settle. A few weeks, maybe months. We stay here, we let Luca handle reorganization, we figure out what normal might look like. And us. He took my hand. That's up to you. This is who I am. The man who can dismantle rivals while discussing it over breakfast. The man who will always have enemies, who will always have to calculate risks. If that's not something you can live with, I'll still honor my promises. You and your grandmother safe, funded, free. I looked at our joined hands, at the beautiful prison of this mountain fortress, at the man who'd shown me exactly who he was without flinching. He wasn't good, not really. But he was trying to be better, and maybe that was enough. I'm staying, I said, but on one condition. Name it. We do this differently going forward. We build something that doesn't require dismantling people. We use your power to transform, not just defend. Because Dante, if we're going to be together, I need us to be moving toward light, not just managing darkness. He smiled, something genuine and almost hopeful. That sounds exhausting and idealistic and probably impossible. Probably, but you said I was your conscience, so let's see if we can make it work. We sealed it with a kiss, and I knew I was choosing complication, risk, a future that would never be simple. But I was also choosing him, flawed, dangerous, trying, and that felt more honest than any safety I could have found in walking away. The next weeks passed in strange suspension. We stayed in the Alps while Luca restructured operations, while investigations concluded, while the world Dante had shaken settled back into new patterns. Grandmother was brought to a nearby facility, and I spent afternoons with her, telling her about Dante, about my choices, about the life I was building. You love him, she said one day, not a question. I think I do, or I'm starting to. And he loves you. He's learning how. I don't think he's had much practice. She smiled at that, her hands moving in sign even as she spoke. Your grandfather would have liked him. They both tried to be better than their circumstances. That's worth something. Is it worth the risk? Little bird, all love is risk. At least with this one, you know what you're risking for. She deteriorated slowly over those weeks, not suddenly, but with the inevitable tide of illness that specialists could slow but not stop. The Swiss doctor was honest. Months, not years, and probably closer to 3 or 4 than 6. Grandmother accepted it with a grace that humbled me, making arrangements, writing letters, preparing me for a future without her. Promise me something, she said one evening as I sat beside her bed. When I'm gone, you won't stay with him out of obligation, out of gratitude for what he did for me. If you stay, it's because you choose him, because he chooses you, nothing else. I promise. Good, she squeezed my hand weakly. Now go, that boy is waiting and waiting makes him calculate. You need to keep him human. I returned to find Dante in his study, reviewing documents with Luca. When he saw me, he dismissed his advisor and pulled me into his arms. How is she? Fatting peacefully but fatting. He held me while I cried, offering no platitudes, just solid presence. When I finally pulled back, he wiped my tears with his thumb. Whatever you need, he said simply. What I needed, I realized, was to move forward, to stop living in crisis mode and start building something intentional. Tell me about the future, I said. Your actual plans, not just damage control. He led me to the windows overlooking the valley. I want to legitimize everything within 5 years. Transform the ambiguous operations into clean businesses. Use the capital to invest in things that actually matter: housing, education, cultural preservation. Leave something behind that isn't just wealth built on moral compromise. That's ambitious. That's necessary, because I'm 36. I've spent half my life in this world and I'm tired. I want what normal people want: a home, a partner, maybe eventually children who don't have to explain what their father does for a living. Is that why you're with me? Because I represent normal. I'm with you because you make me want to be worthy of normal. There's a difference. He turned to face me fully. I know this isn't traditional. We've known each other weeks, not years, but I know what I want. The question is whether you do. What are you asking? I'm asking if you can see a future here with me, building something better than what we inherited. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box, not a ring box, something flatter. I'm not proposing, not yet, but I am making a promise. He opened the box to reveal a key, simple and modern. What's this? The apartment in Vienna. The one I own but never use because it's too far from operations. I've had it renovated. It's yours, your name on the deed, your choice whether I'm welcome or not. Because you need to know you can leave, that you have resources independent of me, that any choice you make going forward is genuinely free. I stared at the key, at this man who understood that real love required the freedom to leave it. Dante. You don't have to decide now, just know the option exists. Know I'm choosing to make it exist. I took the key, feeling its weight, literal and metaphorical, and kissed him. Thank you for understanding what I need. Thank you for staying while you figure out if you want to. Grandmother died 3 months later in the early morning light, surrounded by flowers and photographs, and the peace of knowing she was loved. I was there, holding her hand as her breathing slowed and stopped, as the woman who'd shaped my entire life slipped away into whatever came next. Dante handled everything: the funeral, the paperwork, the small details that grief made impossible. The service was orthodox, traditional, beautiful. Giuliana came and signed her condolences with tears in her eyes. Luca stood sentinel, a surprising source of comfort. And Dante held me through it all, solid and present and exactly what I needed. After the funeral, as we stood in the cemetery looking at fresh earth and wilting flowers, I made my decision. The apartment, I said, show me. It was beautiful, light-filled, perfectly located, decorated with care but left flexible enough to make my own. More than I'd ever imagined having, given freely without expectation. Stay here tonight, I said, if you want. Are you sure? I'm sure I don't want to be alone. I'm sure I want you here. Everything else, I shrugged. We'll figure it out. We did figure it out slowly over the months that followed. I enrolled in university, studying international relations with a minor in languages. Dante supported it without trying to control it, letting me build an identity beyond Dante Carraz's translator. I still worked for him occasionally, but on my terms for projects I believed in. He transformed his operations exactly as promised, divesting from anything questionable, investing in legitimate ventures. It wasn't fast and it wasn't clean, but it was genuine. I watched him struggle with it, with giving up the leverage that had kept him safe, with trusting that legitimacy could be its own protection. Giuliana adopted me unofficially, teaching me to cook, telling me stories about Dante as a child, giving me the family I'd lost when grandmother died. Luca became an unlikely mentor, teaching me about the business side of Dante's world, trusting me with information that once would have seemed dangerous. And Dante and we built something real. Messy, complicated, occasionally infuriating, but real. We fought about his protective instincts, about my stubborn independence, about where to draw ethical lines. But we stayed. We chose each other daily, consciously, without pretending it was easy. 2 years after that frozen night when I'd served champagne to a man I didn't know, Dante proposed. Not with a spectacle, not with performance, but quietly on the terrace of his home, our home, overlooking the city where we'd met. "I want to be worthy of you," he said, kneeling in the space where we'd had our first real conversation. "I'm not there yet, maybe I'll never be, but Emily, I want to spend the rest of my life trying. Will you marry me?" I said yes, not because he'd saved me or provided for me or given me opportunities I couldn't have found elsewhere. I said yes because he'd shown me his worst parts and worked every day to be better. Because he'd given me freedom and I'd chosen to stay. Because love wasn't the absence of darkness, but the commitment to walk toward light together. We married that fall. A small ceremony with Giuliana signing vows through happy tears. Luca giving me away with gruff affection. Friends from both our worlds watching as we promised complicated, imperfect, genuine futures. 5 years later, I stood in the same apartment Dante had given me, now filled with evidence of our shared life, photographs, books in multiple languages, a small bassinet in the corner where our daughter slept. Through the window, Vienna spread out in afternoon light, familiar and foreign, the city where a cold night and a chance conversation had transformed everything. Dante came home as he did every evening now, briefcase in hand, wearing a smile that had become more frequent, more genuine. He kissed me, checked on our sleeping daughter, and pulled me close. "Good day?" he asked. "Normal day," I said, and we both smiled at the word, at how far we'd come to reach something so ordinary. Outside, the city moved through its evening rhythms, people serving, people being served, invisible workers making visible luxury possible. I thought about the girl I'd been, shivering in a thin coat, and the woman I'd become, choosing her own path through complicated love. Not a fairy tale, not a rescue, just a choice made daily to build something better than what we'd inherited, together, flawed, human, and finally home.